Lord, it's really good to be with you again this morning. Let me first just say thank you. I know there's many of you here this morning that you hosted a bunch of our international students from Kearney this weekend. Jane and John were here with a bunch of them. That's the highlight, honestly, of their ministry year. All of our students and our staff look forward to the farm trip to Ord. And so thank you for partnering with us, not just financially, but also through your service and through ministry. And I'm excited to be here to share just a little bit with you, an update about CSF. You guys have been faithful, generous partners in ministry with us for decades. CSF has been around for over 50 years. As Doug mentioned, we have 22 staff and interns currently across 10 campuses in Nebraska, Iowa, and South Dakota. The best way for you to partner with us and know more about that, stop at our table. There's a couple little cards out there I'd love for you to grab. The first one looks like this. It has all 10 of our campuses, and it has the contact information for all of our campus ministers. And so if you have a student or a friend or somebody you know that needs to get connected to Christian Community on one of our campuses, please reach out to our staff. They would love to take them out for coffee, grab lunch with them, get to know them. We have a new staff person in Kearney who will be here sometime, I think before the end of the service, but certainly before the beginning of the second. Him and his wife will be here. They wanted to meet you guys from Ord because Kearney's the closest campus and you partner with us there. And they have a connection to Ord. So his name is Cody Gerke. He's one of our new campus ministers in Kearney, but his wife is Ashley Gerke, who used to be Ashley Zolkowski, who I understand is from Ord, Nebraska. And so she grew up in Ord, and so they're excited to come and maybe reconnect with some people that she knows, and so they'll be here at some point today. We'd love for you to meet them. The other card on our table gives you a little better picture of our finances and what we do and where your money goes at CSF. CSF has grown exponentially. You can go ahead and click the next slide. Over the years, and we have seen God grow, and to be honest with you, we knew this was coming, but our growth has outgrown our giving. And so we are continually looking for new partners, new monthly partners that help us do that. You'll see on there the thing that we always like to tell people. When you partner with CSF, the overwhelming majority of your money goes to people. CSF has just over a $1.1 million budget, and 85% of that, or 83% I think is what it is now, 83% of that goes to staff. That goes to people that we put on the ground. CSF is all about reaching students for Jesus, discipling them to live like Jesus, and then unleashing them across their campus to every acre of their campus and literally to every acre of the world. You guys just experienced that. We are all about unleashing a next generation. And I want to pause just for a second before I finish the update and also just say, well done, Ord Christian Church. Well done, young man, this morning. And good for you, church, for raising up another generation of men and women who lead in ministry. That was incredibly encouraging to me this morning. And so thank you for being the kind of church that does that. Just a few things we're really excited about real quick before we jump into the word this morning. We did launch 2 new campuses in the last couple years. USD up in Vermilion. We've wanted a second campus in South Dakota for a while now. And we actually got started with 4 kids. I live in Wayne, Nebraska, and I'm about an hour south of Vermilion. And I had 4 high school Wayne kids that were going to Vermilion and asked if we would start something. I said, yeah, I'll go lead a Bible study. We'll see what happens. All 4 of them dropped out after a semester of school. But they brought a couple friends, so it worked out great. And we just had this is our second year. We just had our first meeting last week. We had over 20 students come. So it's really growing and vibrant, and that's been exciting. We launched at Iowa Western Community College. It wasn't supposed to launch until this year. Last year was supposed to be kind of our exploratory year, and our guy, Jacob Humphreys, that we hired, got there, started looking around. 12 students said, we want to start now. So they started in January. They got about a dozen students coming. They had 3 baptisms already last year. And so that's been exciting. You can click back here real quick. We had 73 baptisms at CSF last year, 73 students who made that decision to surrender their life to Jesus. Our camp team this summer, many of you were at Piebald High School Week. You saw 2 of our camp team. That's one of our favorite things that we do. We think it's one of our best leadership development pieces of CSF. And our camp team personally was a part of 31 high school students surrendering their life to Jesus this summer. And so that was very exciting. If you were here last year when I was here, we launched this new theme at CSF of Every Acre. That we want somebody, a student who knows Jesus on every acre of every campus, making Jesus known. And that led last year to the most student-led Bible studies in the history of CSF by a significant margin, by like 15 more than ever. And so that's been fun. And we've seen numerical growth across all of our campuses. And I tell you all those stories and numbers and things just to say, I say this every time I'm here, Ord, and it's true. Those aren't just CSF stories, they're Ord Christian Church stories. Unless you partner with us, we cannot see that happen. And so in August and a little bit into September, we run, you can go ahead and click ahead, what we call CSF 300. Many of you saw the board out there. That's the master board because this is our last weekend. I'm here at Ord. One of our other staff is in Superior this morning, and this is our last weekend. We kind of wrap our CSF 300 campaign up. It's a deal that we do every year. And it's based on the story of Gideon found in the book of Judges, where God took Gideon's army and he whittled it down to only 300 men, and they won a great victory against thousands of men. And we believe, just like that at CSF, that 300 or whatever number with God is way more powerful than whatever 100,000 without him. And so every year we do this campaign. We started it almost 10 years ago, where every number between 1 and 300 that we would like a dollar amount given for each of those numbers. And it used to be that if every one of those numbers was given, that would cover all of our campus ministry budgets. So like all the money that we use for buying Bibles for students, discipleship material that we give to students, outreach events like the farm trip, some of those things, outreach events on campus, welcome weeks, all of our ministry expenses on our campuses, it covers that. And that used to be the case. We've grown a little bit, and so we keep the board. And then on the bottom, you'll see what we call Mighty Warrior Gifts. I had somebody at the first church that I went to who said, what if I want to give a number that's not on the board? Is that okay? I said, well, yes. I went to Bible college, but I can do the math. And I'll just put your gift on about 6 different numbers. And so we added what we call Mighty Warrior Gifts because that's what God called Gideon in the story. A gift of 1,000, 2,500, 5,000, 7,500, or 10,000. And that helps us. It covers all campus ministry expenses and what we call, each of our staff have a personal ministry expense budget, and they get so much per month, and that's for taking a student out for coffee, buying a student lunch, and having gospel conversations. And so if that board gets cleared, all of that's covered for the entire year. And so you guys see the master board. That's what's left, those numbers up top, 1 through 300. You'll notice that almost all of our 200s are gone. And so that's the numbers that are left. We would love to encourage you to pray about a one-time gift to help us accomplish that. If you know what that is, you can just peel your number off and put a check or cash in the bag that's out there. If you want to go home and pray about it, we would love for you to do that. You can take one of these cards that has a deal on the back, and you can mail it back to our address in Wayne. And so we love this campaign. One of my favorite things is the numbers. We had a little, it's just cool how people have different things. We had a 5-year-old girl who came up and said, number 12 is my softball jersey number, and gave us $12 cash. I love that there's just different people investing. And so you can click ahead one more slide. And these are the stories that you get to write. This is one of our Council Bluffs students. We weren't even prepared to start ministry, and yet God said, if you would get going, there are people who need to know Jesus. And we're seeing that across the college campus, that there is a generation of students. We are seeing the last 2 years, these incoming freshmen, something is happening with this generation of people. God is doing something. These revivals that you're hearing about on campuses, it's not just 1 or 2, it's literally all over the country. And your support helps us do that. There are campuses full of hurting students just this week. I got one more story, and I promise the sermon's not that long. But just this week, one of our campus ministers in Lincoln, his name is Doug, and he called and he said, well, God had me in the right place today. And I said, okay, Doug. So come to find out, Doug was walking through the student center at Lincoln, and there was a student literally on the ledge of the up part of the building ready to jump. And Doug walked by, saw him, talked to him, got him inside, got to pray with him, got to get him professional help. And it was just this reminder to us that our campuses are full of students who do not have hope. Or you are helping us bring hope to a hopeless group of people. And so I want to say thank you. And I want to say that your generosity and your partnership is making a difference. It made a difference in helping us start Vermilion. I've been the one that's been driving to Vermilion, not every week. We have a really good volunteer, but we haven't got full-time staff up there yet. And it's at Vermilion last year that I met a girl named Cam. And you can go ahead and click to the sermon slides. We'll jump into the message this morning. And I met this girl named Cam who started coming to our ministry. She became one of our student leaders. And Cam has a friend that I've never met who has ruined my life. Let me explain. So one day we were having Bible study. We're walking through the book of Nehemiah last year. And one of the questions became, who is the person that you think of when you think of what it looks like to look like Jesus? So who's the person in your life that when you think of them, that's the person you think looks and lives the most like Jesus? And we kind of were waiting for a response, and Cam said, I know right away. I said, okay, Cam, who is it? And Cam says, I have this friend. It's the same person every time. She's a friend of mine from high school. And she goes, every time somebody asks me this is who I think of. And she said, this friend, I've never heard her say anything ungodly. I said, explain that to me. And she said, she goes, she has issues and she has problems and she has struggles, but she goes, I've never heard her say an unkind word. I've never heard her gossip. I've just seen her every time she talks. She just encourages someone or she uplifts someone, or when somebody tries to tear somebody down, she's the one that goes, oh, but I love this about them. And she goes, I've just never heard her say anything that I don't think Jesus would say. And we all kind of sat there, and it was funny because we all agreed that if you had asked if the question had been, what's the top 10 characteristics of somebody who lives like Jesus, that might not have made the list. And yet, if you asked us who the person was that we thought of, all of us said our person had that characteristic too. And it was super convicting, this idea that nothing, I shouldn't act or say or do anything that hurts people or that Jesus wouldn't say. And so you know how sometimes somebody says something and you can't get it out of your head, right? And so I go home, and some of you know me pretty well, and I'm a fairly sarcastic person, and sometimes my mouth writes checks that my rest of my body can't cash. And so I got home, and I would get ready to say something, and in my head it'd be like the Holy Spirit goes, oh, Justin, Cam's friend wouldn't say that. And I'd bite my tongue, and then I'd want, oh, Justin, Cam's friend wouldn't do that. Justin, Cam's friend wouldn't think that. And I got back the next week, I said, Cam, your friend is ruining my life. And here's the funny thing. I told this story at my home church's Journey in Wayne. I teach there on their teaching team, and I told this story, and it blew up in our church. And so I had this whole week of my phone just, Cam's friend is terrible. I can't stand Cam's friend. One of my friends texted me, she goes, I'm at the grocery store, and this lady in front of me was super rude, and I was going to tell her what's up. And then I was like, oh, Cam's friend wouldn't tell her what's up. And so now I'm just sitting here, and I'm mad, and Cam's friend is terrible. And it was like this whole thing about Cam. So I told Cam, I said, your friend is ruining the lives of hundreds of Christians. But this morning, we're going to be in 1 John chapter 2. And in 1 John chapter 2, we're going to look at just 7 verses this morning. But in 1 John chapter 2, you're going to see that the main theme of this whole verse, in fact, the main theme of the whole letter of 1 John, is that you and I have to love each other. That you and I are called to be Cam's friend to everyone. And the word that John will use over and over and over again in these verses and over again in his letter, many of you know this, the New Testament was written in Greek, and the word that he uses for love is a Greek word, agape, and many of you have heard that before, that word. And this is a word that the Bible uses to describe an elevated, different kind of love. It's the word that describes God's love for the church in Ephesians 5. It's the word that's used to describe God's love for the world in John 3:16. For God so agape the world that he gave his only son. It's the word that God will use a little bit later in chapter 4 of 1 John to describe God himself. Agape love is different. It's an elevated, not like the rest of the world kind of love. It gives without any expectation of return. It puts other people's needs above their own. It's sacrificial, it's unconditional, it's never ending. It's the kind of love that Paul described in the book of Romans in chapter 13, where he said, "Owe no one anything except to love each other. The one who loves another has fulfilled the law. For the commandments, you should not commit adultery, you shouldn't murder, you shouldn't steal, you shouldn't covet. Any other commandment is summed up in this, that you love your neighbor as yourself. Love does no wrong to a neighbor, therefore love is fulfilling of the law." And so as we dive into 1 John this morning, we're going to start in chapter 2, verse 7, and we're going to see a few things that John wants us to know about this agape, different, elevated, like Jesus kind of love. And the first thing is this, that this love, it has been, it is, and it always will be the defining characteristic of a follower of Jesus. Listen to what he says in verses 7 and 8. He says, "Beloved, I'm writing you no new commandment, but an old commandment that you've had from the beginning. The old commandment is the word that you have heard. At the same time, it's a new commandment that I'm writing to you, which is true, and in him and in you, because the darkness is passing away and the true light is already shining." Now, you read that and it seems like John's almost contradicting himself, right? Like, John literally says, "I'm not giving you a new commandment here. This is an old one. It's been around forever." Well, but it's kind of a new one. And so it seems like John's contradicting himself, but this is actually the case. Let me explain. John is telling us it is an old commandment. Because throughout God's history, throughout the Old Testament, loving your neighbor has always been the commandment. God's people have always been told to love one another. God's people have always been defined by how they love each other. It is an old commandment. It is not new. They should already know this. But it's new because John is going to tell us that we have to love people like Jesus loved us. And so now that Jesus has entered the picture, this old commandment has been elevated. It's not new, and yet it is. It's the same commandment to love each other, but how that love is defined has been elevated because of who Jesus is. And now that Jesus has entered the picture, he shows us what this love for each other is supposed to look like. In John chapter 13, Jesus said the same thing. Jesus said, "A new commandment I give you, that you love one another." Well, that's not a new commandment. But Jesus goes on, he says, "Just as I have loved you." Well, that's new. He says, that's how you're also to love one another. By how we love each other just like Jesus loved us, that's how people will know that we are his disciples, if we love one another. That's how people will know that we follow Jesus. In church, this morning, my suggestion to you and to me is very simple, that it is really easy to talk about loving each other, but it is a whole other story when we actually have to love each other like Jesus. Because oftentimes, if we said, "Hey, do you love each other?" You'd go, "Yeah, we all love each other." Right? That's what my house would say, right? My wife's not here. She's not going to contradict me. Like, we would say, "Yeah, we love each other." But if somebody said, "So this last week, think about all the ways that you interacted with each other. Did it always look like Jesus?" Well, hang on. I'd like the old one better, right? It's really easy to say that we love each other. In our homes, in our churches, in our communities, in our jobs. It's really easy to say that. But Jesus says we have to love each other the same way that he loved us. John goes on and he wants us to know that if we aren't loving, then we are not in the light of Jesus. Listen to what he says. John says some hard things here. In verse 9, he says, whoever says he is in the light and hates his brother is still in darkness. I love these verses from John because he's just very blunt. John says, here's the deal. You can talk all you want about loving people, but if you say you love each other, but you don't, if you say you're walking with Jesus, the light of the world, but you hate your brother, you don't love your brother or sister, then you are not walking with Jesus. You are walking in darkness. Jesus is the light of the world, and over and over and over again in this letter, John tells us that if we want to see what love is, we have to look to Jesus. And what he says here is if we aren't loving others, then we're not abiding in Jesus because Jesus' love is different. Jesus described it in Matthew 5. He says, you've heard that it said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. He said, but I say to you, you got to love your enemy. You got to love the people who wrong you. You got to pray for those who persecute you so that you may be sons of your Father who is in heaven. For he makes the sun rise on the evil and the good. He sends rain on the just and the unjust. He says, if you love those who love you, what reward is that? He says, the tax collectors do that, the people who are living completely outside the will of God. He says, if you greet only your brothers, what are you doing more than others? Even the Gentiles, even the people who don't know Jesus do that. You must be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. I think the question that Jesus is driving at, the question that John is driving at, is do the way we love each other, is it make us look any different than the way the world loves each other? Because the world says they love people, but they don't know how Jesus loves people. See, Jesus is our example of love. And we, the church, are the example to the world of Jesus. Let me say that again. Jesus is our example of love. But the church, you and me, we are the example to the world of Jesus. And the question is, what kind of example do we set by the way we treat each other? To love people means to love and treat them the same way Jesus loved and treated us. Think about that for a minute, church. Jesus gave me and you unconditional forgiveness. No matter what we've done, no matter what we've said, no matter how horrible we've been, there's never a moment where Jesus will not forgive us. We have done things, we have said things that should make Jesus never want to help us, to never want to serve with us. He shouldn't even want to recognize us. And yet Jesus does things for us all the time that we do not deserve. He helps us and serves us even when we don't recognize that he's doing it, even when we don't care that he does it. Jesus met us in our deepest and darkest and hardest place and just was present with us. He wasn't embarrassed by us. He wasn't judgmental of us. He just came to us. Jesus is never annoyed at being interrupted by us. Jesus gives beyond what seems humanly possible without any expectation of anything in return. He forgives the most unforgivable things. He expects the best in everyone, in all of us. He believes the best, even when you and I have done nothing to show him that should be his expectation. Jesus picks people up, even when they failed for the 1,000th time. That's how Jesus loves us. And that's how we are supposed to love each other. Because without love, John tells us, without that kind of love in our life, we will fall into darkness. He goes on in verse 10. He says, whoever loves his brother abides in the light, and in him there is no cause for stumbling. But whoever hates his brother is in the darkness and walks in the darkness and doesn't know where he's going because the darkness has blinded his eyes. John says that if we say we are walking in the light of Jesus, but we hate our brother, we are actually still walking in darkness. John says that if you and I don't learn to love each other the way Jesus loves us, eventually we will stumble. Our life will be messed up. We won't be able to figure out where we're going. And I don't know about you, but that makes sense to me. I don't know what your home or your community or what that looks like, but that is true in my life. When my wife and I are not loving each other, I tend to stumble in my house. Sometimes I'm shoved, but it's broken, right? When my kids and when our relationship is not where Jesus wants it to be, my life is messed up. When the people in my church, including me, say things and do things that are outside of Jesus, when I talk about people in a way that Jesus wouldn't talk about them, when I'm more concerned about telling people what's wrong with my church than I am with what's right, there is disunity and disharmony, and my church tends to stumble. The same is true in my job. The same is true in my neighborhood. The same is true in where my kids go to school. That when we do not love each other, people end up stumbling in the darkness with no direction in life. And John says either we are in the world and darkness, or we belong to Jesus and the light, that hate and love are outward signs of where we reside. And that's what John is telling us this morning, that the way we treat each other is an indication of where we really reside. And so the question is, do I love people in a way that shows the world that I walk in the light, or does it look like my life is still in darkness? And John reminds us that we have a choice. I love the story of the famous pastors Charles Spurgeon and Joseph Parker. They both led very prominent, thriving, growing churches in the 19th century in London. And one Sunday, there had just been a lot of conflict. That happens, right? Like, we all say we all work together, but then sometimes somebody asks us about the other church in town, we go, well, right? And that's what was happening. And so there was this little bit of competition, and one Sunday, Parker got in his pulpit, and he publicly took a shot at Spurgeon's church, specifically the orphanage that they ran for kids. And Parker made a comment about, well, yeah, they do a good work, but they could make that orphanage look a little bit better. Like they kind of just, and he took a shot at Spurgeon. Well, then Spurgeon heard that Parker had criticized this, and so the next Sunday, Spurgeon got up in his pulpit and he took a shot at Parker. And he said, that church, I heard they said some things. Well, I know this about them. Well, that incident was printed in the local newspaper. And it was widely discussed throughout the city. And it was on every, it reminds me, I don't know, does Ord have one of these? Wayne does. It's called the Residents of Wayne Facebook page. You guys have one of those here about Ord? It's the place where everybody complains and all the drama happens, but good Christians don't post. They just read it and enjoy it, right? And thanks. I can tell you have one. And that's what was happening. It was spreading all over town. And so the next Sunday, thousands, this huge crowd packs Parker's church. I mean, it is to the wall. And they're not there for the gospel. They're there because they assume that Parker is going to take his shot back at Spurgeon. And Parker got up and he made a choice. He got up and he says, church, I know many of you are here for the first time and you're here to hear what I have to say about Dr. Spurgeon and his church. Well, let me tell you. He said, Dr. Spurgeon's church is a light to our city, and his orphanage is saving hundreds of children from certain death. He said, I'm ashamed that I even remotely tried to say something derogatory about it. And he said, church, I understand that Dr. Spurgeon is not in his pulpit today, but that this is the Sunday that his church normally takes an offering for the orphanage. He said, so I suggest that we take one here instead. And the church got silent. I mean, this whole group of people who the majority of came just to see the latest gossip and the latest words that would be spouted in darkness. And this guy gets up and makes a choice that says, that's not how we are here. And he says, it's my bad. And the story goes that after the crowd silence kind of awkwardly went away, that the ushers had to empty the collection plates 3 times because of the generosity of the church. Church, I think the question becomes, what would happen if we actually love people the way Jesus told us to? Well, here's what I would tell you. Your doors would be flooded with people. Your chairs would be filled with hopeless people, because this is what the world needs. They need this kind of love. And when we love each other, it doesn't just change us, it changes those around us who don't know what that love looks like. That's really what the rest of that chapter is about. The next few verses, I'm not going to read them this morning, but what John says is, he says, this is true for everyone. He says, old people, young people, new people, people that have been there forever, brothers, sisters, moms, dads. He said, everybody. It's for everybody. All people are called to love all people. Bible scholar David Allen says this. He says, think about, if that's hard for you, think about Jesus and just the disciples who followed him those 3 years and how hard that group must have been to love. Because the natural pushback is, well, Justin, you don't know who's in my family, right? Justin, you don't know what that guy at church said to me last week. That's the hard part, right? But he says, think about the people that Jesus had to love. Peter, the disciple who always talked when he should have been quiet. Peter, the guy who denied Jesus when Jesus needed him the most. Doubting Thomas, who wouldn't believe until he saw it with his own hands and with his own eyes and touched it with his own hands. James and John, the sons of thunder, who wanted what wasn't theirs to ask for, and then one time told Jesus, you know what, we should just wipe out everyone who doesn't do the things we want. And let's not forget betraying Judas, whose feet Jesus washed right before he took him to die. Remind me again, church, who it is that you and I can't love. But it's hard, right? Because there are people in our lives, maybe even in our families, maybe in our churches, our community, wherever, that have done things to us or have done things to the world that it's just hard to love them. And it's easy to say, well, I love the sinner and hate the sin. That's another thing that's easy to say and a lot harder to do. And C.S. Lewis, the famous Christian author, one time talked about how he confessed, he said, I struggle with that. Like, how do I love people who have lived so far outside the will of God? How do I truly love the sinner and hate the sin? He said, then one day it became clear to me. He said, it occurred to me that there was one person in my life who I had been doing that my whole life. He said, it just hit me that I had one person in my life whose sin had been great and whose sin had actually personally wronged me, and yet I had never had any trouble loving them. He said, that person was me. He said, however much I disliked my own cowardice, my own conceit, my own greed, boy, I had no trouble going on loving myself. He said there'd never been the slightest difficulty about it. He said, in fact, the very reason why I hated those things was that I loved me so much. Just because I loved myself, I was sorry to find that I was the sort of man who would still do those things. And the only thing that changes that, church, is the love of Jesus. Jesus is the Cam's friend to you and me. Jesus is the one who loved you and me out of darkness, right? Jesus met me in my darkest place. He didn't get me to obey my way out of darkness. He didn't get me to say the right thing. He didn't get me to pull myself up out of. Jesus loved me in the darkness. And his love led me to the light. And then because of that love, he taught me and he discipled me on how to live and obey him and his word. But it began with the love of a friend named Jesus. In church, there are hundreds of people who need that love from you. But church, it begins with each other. The way that we talk to each other, the way that we encourage and build each other up instead of tear each other down, the way we forgive even when that person has done nothing that deserves our forgiveness. We do it anyway. Why? Because we want to be a friend like Jesus was to us. Isn't Cam's friend who we all want to be? And church, I'll be honest with you as we wrap this up this morning, what was convicting to me was this. It hit me that there is a difference between following Jesus and looking like Jesus. There shouldn't be, but there is. Let me explain. Because I think if you asked the majority of my friends, if you said, hey, tell us somebody you know that follows Jesus, I think I would be close to the top of the list. I really do. I think most of my friends associate me with that I follow Jesus. Some of that's because I'm a pastor, so it's easier for them, right? But here's what convicted me. If you asked my friends, who is somebody in your life who looks the most like Jesus? I'm worried that my name is further down the list than I would like. Because it's easy to say that you follow Jesus, but it is a whole different story to actually look like him. And the only way that that can change is to sit at the feet of our friend Jesus, who loves us unconditionally out of darkness into light. So, church, let me ask us this morning, are you and I the friend that others say they think of when they think of what it means to be like Jesus? And if you're further down the list than you'd like to, it's okay. I have a friend named Jesus who will help us. I have a friend named Jesus who loves you anyway. And I have a friend named Jesus who will pick us up out of our mistakes and love us into loving others the way he does us. Jesus, thank you that you are that friend to us, that you meet us. Romans 5 says that while we were still sinners, while we were still encompassed by darkness, you came and you died for us. You loved us into forgiveness and freedom and light. And then, Jesus, you disciple us and you teach us from your word what's right and what's wrong. You teach us how to live, but Jesus, you teach us also how to love. And Jesus, may we lead with the same love that you led with us. And may it begin in our homes and the way we treat our spouses and our kids and our parents. May it begin in our churches and the way we treat each other and the people who lead us and the people who serve here and the people who've never been here and come for the first time. May it be that way in our jobs and in our communities and in our neighborhoods. Jesus, may it be known that Ord Christian Church just loves people different than anybody else. And then, Jesus, would you give us the opportunity for us to tell people that it's only because of you? Jesus, may we be the friend that other people think of when they think of what it looks like to be like you. We thank you for that, Jesus. And it is in your name we pray. Amen.